The Prime Minister tabled a letter during question time from the Foreign Minister Penny Wong to the Optus Chief Executive Kelly by Rosmarin. In it, she says this serious incident creates a risk that the personal information of current and former mutual customers of both the Passport Office and Optus will be subject to exploitation by criminals. There is no justification for these Australians or for taxpayers more broadly on their behalf to bear the cost of obtaining a new passport. I therefore seek your earliest confirmation that Optus will cover the passport application fees of any customers affected by this breach. For more on this, let's bring in Karen Andrews, the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. Former Home Affairs Minister yourself, Karen Andrews, thanks for your time. Do you welcome this letter from Penny Wong to Optus?
Yes, I do, but let's be clear, that's come off the back of the movements that Senator James Patterson made yesterday. He did a couple of things. He raised in question time in the Senate, direct question to Penny Wong, what was the federal government going to do in relation to passports? Penny Wong said she was open to a discussion, etc. Honourable words to that effect. And then James Patterson, Senator Birmingham, put out a media release calling on Labor to facilitate this. And then again this morning, I made the call that this should be happening, that passports should actually be replaced.
And so would you like to see, now that this letter's gone out, would you like to see the government also firm up its advice? In that letter, it sounds very much like the government is of the view that if you've been the subject of this breach and your passport details have been affected, you should replace it. But no definitive recommendation that people do it. Should they be urging people to go out and replace it?
Look, I believe that they should. I think that what has been lacking in this whole scenario is clear and definitive advice from the federal government to Australians to say, this is what has occurred and this is what you need to do to protect your data. So it was known very early on in the piece, I believe, that passports for some individuals, details had been disclosed. We've subsequently found out about Medicare numbers, driver's licence numbers have also been made available. Now that makes it very easy for people to fulfil the requirements of a 100-point check. So that means if you're relying on a passport number and you just have to fill in the passport number, then you are at risk, serious risk if someone has that.
So you firm up that recommendation to replace them. The problem is, though, the backlog which was left by your government in terms of the passport applications, it's huge. And they've been getting on top of it, but still playing catch-up.
Look, it's not clear how much action the current government has taken to relieve the backlog. I'm aware that they advertise for more people to come in and process passport applications.
They did put on hundreds more staff.
Yep, so they've done that. So it should be a work in progress for them, and the numbers should be starting to significantly reduce. We know that it is an issue, the government knows that it's an issue as well, but these are things that governments of any day have to deal with. So I would like the government to get on top of the passport processing issues, pursue Optus to say passports do need to be replaced and this is the cost to Optus. It shouldn't be the customer. So I think that there could have been a stronger letter sent by Penny Wong, but in any case, the letter has been sent now, and that's a step forward.
Why didn't the former government fully bring telcos under the Critical Infrastructure Act?
Because the parts of that Act that they are not covered by, they are covered by a separate Act, one of the Telecommunications Acts. So they are covered by the same terms, just under two separate Acts. So,
but apparently, from what I understand, that they weren't subject to the same penetration testing by the government that other agencies like energy companies and water companies were.
There was a requirement for telecommunications providers, so telcos in this case Optus, to make sure that they had in place what their cyber response plan was, amongst other things. Now, the government of the day at the time, which was the Coalition, negotiated this with the Labor Party, so they agreed to what the terms were going to be. So if they didn't familiarise themselves with the legislation to the point that they were able to identify if and when there is an issue, and I don't agree that there is an issue, then they had the opportunity to raise that. They've also been in government for several months.
But it's not. This is not from Labor. This is from just looking at this situation independently and saying if the telcos weren't experiencing the same penetration testing from government as, say, a water or energy company, why is that appropriate?
A lot of the work that was separated out from the critical infrastructure legislation was separated out because it's covered by a separate act. Now, I worked very closely with a whole range of industry providers across all of the 11 critical sectors.
And they were complaining about the costs, so they didn't want to be covered by this as well.
Exactly.
But clearly what they were doing wasn't sufficient, was it?
In hindsight, there was clearly a gap in what they were doing. And Optus does get to wear the responsibility for that, as does any organisation out there that is collecting and retaining people's data. So I don't make any excuses for Optus or for any other organisation. My issue throughout this has been what I'm very confident is a lacklustre response by the federal government. There are millions of people out there who have been affected by this, and they need some clear direction as to what they need to do.
But you know this area better than most, and obviously you weren't the communications minister, you're the Home Affairs minister, but that penetration testing is crucial, isn't it, to tell us that our critical infrastructure is up to scratch. In hindsight, would you like to see the telcos back brought within that umbrella?
Look, I'm very open to exploring what the options are from here. So let's be clear. The escalation of technology has been enormous for a number of years, and all nations are doing their best to stay ahead of what the issues are. I'm confident that the critical infrastructure legislation that we put in place was very good, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be updated, it shouldn't be amended as needed. So I'm very happy to work with the Labor government to do what is needed. But there is nothing that is before me at the moment to look at.
And the ransomware private members bill that you've put forward, they haven't taken that up. What would your ransomware bill achieve? What's the aim of that?
Yep, well, can I pick up where the situation is at the moment? So I actually delivered a ransomware action plan in October of last year. We put the legislation into the House of Representatives in February. It wasn't able to be debated and passed before we ceased for an election. There's since been a change of government. Now, Labor talked a big story about ransomware and cyber before the election, but they haven't put in any legislation specific to cyber or ransomware. So I've put in the exact same legislation effectively. I introduced that into the House on Monday. It would have come in the last sitting week, but for the passing of the Queen. So this is an easy win for the government to be able to do to pass the legislation. They haven't done anything else. I asked for it to go.
What specifically does it achieve, though?
Okay, so it increases the number of penalties that are available to individuals. So in this case, it would potentially apply to the hackers. So it would increase the penalty. It introduces new penalties for malware, for people who are found guilty of cyber extortion. So it has all those things in place. But there's been no engagement from the Labor Party. And in fact, when I asked for it to be referred to the selection committee, it was actually knocked out by a predominantly Labor selection party. So there's no legislation before the House at all, which is really disappointing.
The Shadow Home Affairs Minister, Karen Andrews, will stay in touch. Unfortunately, it's an issue, I think, which will be lingering for a fair while. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.